Hello YouTube. In my videos I mentioned several times my field research in Yucatan, Mexico. Recently I heard an interesting report about underwater humanoids in Belize. So later in this video I'll get to it. But now it's time to describe what I have been looking for in Mexico. To start with, Belize is next door to Quintana Roo. I have not been to Belize. I was on the border of that country with Mexico, but as for Yucatan, I visited and did field research a few times in the early 1990s and later in 2008. My goal was to prove some ideas of Ivan Yefremov, that mysterious Soviet scientist, writer, philosopher, field researcher, and according to the KGB, the Soviet secret police, he was an alien from outer space. I also wanted to see if there is any way to confirm the rumors that circulated about Soviet submarines operating clandestinely in the waters of Yucatan, and that they had actually observed underwater roads and ruins there beneath the surface of the sea. Well, in Belize I had a great contact, a very intelligent and interesting person, whom I had known for many years, but unfortunately have lost touch with him about 5 years ago. He told me a lot about his country. I did also my own research in Yucatan as it pertains to Belize, and of course its neighbor, regarding cryptozoology. So it was interesting to see the similarities between the Eurasian, Russian, and even sometimes Central Asian abominable snowmen or yeti and their cousins in Central and South America. As for Yucatan, I wanted to learn if they have any artifacts from that mysterious ancient Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. I had my reasons to believe that they will find one day proof of ancient Minoans visiting what we call Mexico today. Suffice it to say, the reach of the Minoans extended all the way to the territories that comprise northern Russia today. But Crete deserves its own video or two. It was an incredible civilization. I have my own take and my own research and discoveries about ancient Minoan Empire, if you want to call it that way. But also in another video I will tell you about connections between Mesoamerica and ancient India. This is also fascinating. So I learned much about the local Yucatan paranormal and Forteana in the 1990s while I was in Yucatan. Some of the knowledgeable people I spoke to that were there in 1991 were not at the same place or anywhere when I came back years later. In 2008 was a very interesting experience in itself too. But a number of things changed, of course, because things change. Again, my research is limited by paranormal phenomena, but there is much more fascinating stuff in Yucatan, and I will tell you about it in a later video. And of course later, after 2008, great discoveries took place in the years after 2012 actually, and we will talk about some, because such discoveries confirmed what has been rumored or stated in writing decades ago about Yucatan's history about 12,000 years ago. Very interesting subject. What is Yucatan and Quintana Roo? Some people call it Quintana Roo, but Quintana Roo is a state actually privileged by nature, surrounded by the beautiful Caribbean Sea, mangroves, jungles, cenotes, underground rivers and lagoons. People call it justifiably Mexican paradise. Quintana Roo is a coastal state stretching along the northeast of the Yucatan Peninsula in southeastern Mexico. Its region and local people jealously guard the secrets of the Mayan ancestors, or I should say Maya ancestors, whose greatness is visible in its traditions and archaeological sites. It is located on the Yucatan Peninsula in the southeastern region of the country, bordered by Yucatan to the north and by Belize to the south. It is considered one of the youngest states in Mexico, along with Baja California Sur. I used to speak better Spanish before. I spoke it as much as I could years ago. Well, as for Belize ancient history, here's an example. The largest Maya city ever excavated in Belize, Caracol, is a huge site that features majestic temples that modern visitors can climb to, enjoy a spectacular view of the surrounding Chiquibul Forest Reserve. Still an active archaeological site, Caracol has revealed many of its treasures, but much work is needed to uncover all of its secrets. As you can guess, there are organized looters that have been stealing Maya artifacts and selling them abroad. Well, we had them in my former country of birth too, and in Ukraine, and I'll tell you one day about a very interesting island and discoveries there. But back to Mexico. The border between the two countries has seen a lot of action. We will look at some history later, as well as some very strange creatures that have been sighted there. There are no rivers in Yucatan Peninsula, the traditional home of the Maya civilization. The ancient Mayas relied on water-filled sinkholes called cenotes, which only exist in Mexico, for everything from drinking water to religious ceremonies. The Maya believed sinkholes led to the underworld, but apparently not all the sinkholes in Yucatan led to the Mayan underworld. The people of Mayapán used the legend of a feathered serpent with the head of the size of a horse to scare people away from the sinkhole. Well, I wonder if there have been sightings of that feathered serpent in the recent years. Look, let's just say what I told you took place until recently. So let me start with the latest news from Belize, and I will try to confirm that this is a true story. So here is what I found out. In ancient times, a huge colony of Maya Indians lived on the territory of Belize. There are claims of evidence allegedly left from the Maya times of cohabitation with representatives of the aquatic environment. Moreover, it is argued that in the first millennium BC, a war broke out between the Maya and the inhabitants of the ocean. The Indians abandoned the idea that they were forbidden to fish and collected food on the coast, so they announced the beginning of a confrontation. The Maya won the fight and received the right to full control of the coastal zone of what is now Belize. Someone will say that this is just an analog of our fairy tales and myths. Maybe, but reports of encounters with mermaids or underwater humanoids in this region did not only date back to ancient times. Apparently, in the Middle Ages, Spanish and Portuguese sailors, and later Turkish and Dutch merchants, wrote about these fantastic creatures. The indigenous people of Belize and neighboring countries also support the stories. During the Caribbean crisis, according to that Belize report, Soviet sailors and the military at an unofficial level talked about meetings with men and women who were different from ordinary people and without equipment plunged deep into the water, swimming quickly and maneuvering. Also, at the end of 1970s, 1980s, girls and boys with webbing between their fingers and toes became more frequent in the nets of local fishermen. Many people ask why there are no photographs of bodies of these creatures. Very simple, according to that report. The cry of these underwater creatures leads a person to a state of paralysis or stupor. While the humanoid sea creature comes to its senses, these inhabitants of the aquatic environment that have fallen into the nets get out of them, cutting their ways to retreat. So the humans are impacted, but not the underwater humanoids. In 2006, a local fisherman told how he once noticed a girl and a small child clinging to her shoulders. They swam at the depth of 2.53 meters and then disappeared into the depths. Almost every second inhabitant of the coastal regions of Belize and neighboring countries is a bearer of similar stories. Well, I also talk to people, so I don't want to say every second inhabitant. But let's continue. In 2011, 3 poachers tried to catch one child of underwater people. They almost managed to do it, but 5 men and 3 women came to the rescue of the baby. Using their cry, they easily returned the child to themselves. But the story did not end at that point. Until 2018, the hunt for these mysterious inhabitants of the ocean was carried out quite legally. The country's government had promised to pay $1.5 million to anyone who can catch one of these mysterious creatures. This often led to conflicts. The fishermen and the hunters who returned from the voyage, well, they came with teared up nets, cuts in their hands, and in several cases, mild or severe hearing loss. The acoustic impact was quite extremely powerful. Finally, in 2018, the Belizean authorities abandoned the idea of capturing one of these representatives cohabiting with our underwater civilization. However, ardent hunters continued their attempts. To stop this, permission was introduced to confiscate property and deprive fishing licenses. From that moment, instead of trying to catch the creatures, it was decided to photograph them, but the world has not yet acquired clear pictures. Well, what can I tell you? I do not know who produced this report. And I have serious doubts about Belize government intending to pay $1.5 million for capture of humanoids. I'm too cynical for that, and I have my ideas about the Belize government. But here's what I'll tell you. First of all, about this underwater wars, you have to look at ancient India, and my research of the underwater beings and the wars that were waged by those who live in the celestial abode against those millions who resided in the ocean, and it was quite an active war, and I described it all before, also in my book. Here's what else I'll tell you. I became interested in the Soviet connection because USOs, unidentified submersible objects, are one of the areas of my research, and I co-authored Russia's USO Secrets, published in 6 or more languages. I would love to see the book translated into Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and I'm sure there are people there who have much to share in those countries, and they would contact me or my colleague Philip Mental. But that's just a dream. So the mention of the Caribbean crisis sent me back to the reference materials. You see, I suspected that those Soviet submarines whose crews allegedly observed and reported underwater ruins and roads by the coast of Yucatan, I suspected that they were actually there in 1970, maybe even later. So let me give you some background, if you don't mind. I love to talk about submarines and related history. You see, Soviet naval ships visits to Cuba continued since 1960s. The second one took place in May of 1970, and it included 2 Foxtrot submarines and again a nuclear-propelled submarine, the Echo 2 Project 675 class cruise missile submarine. Whereas nuclear torpedoes were carried in most, if not all, Soviet combat submarines, the submarine that visited at that time had nuclear as well as conventional anti-ship missiles. All 3 submarines and accompanying sub-tender put into the port of Cienfuegos. The arrival of a nuclear submarine with nuclear missiles in a Cuban port was a significant escalation of the Soviet naval presence. But only 3 months later, the 3rd Soviet naval visit to Cuban waters occurred at Cienfuegos. It included a submarine tender, very important, an oiler, and significantly a landing ship carrying 2 barges identified as support craft for nuclear-propelled submarines. The tender remained for 2 weeks and then it sailed to the port of Mariel, 25 miles west of Havana. The barges stayed at Cienfuegos, where construction of shore facilities for servicing naval ships continued. After several members of the U.S. Congress began to question the Nixon administration about the enhanced Soviet presence 90 miles south of the United States, the White House issued a public warning in late September. According to the statement, the U.S. government was watching the situation very closely, and it was being viewed with the utmost seriousness. There was no subsequent official U.S. reaction. The next task force that visited Cuba in February of 1971 included a November-class attack submarine that was surfaced at Cienfuegos by an accompanying tender. In May, an Echo 2 guided missile submarine was serviced by a submarine tender at the port of Nipe on the northeastern coast. A year later, a Gulf 2 ballistic missile submarine with 3 nuclear ballistic missiles entered Nipe, accompanied by a destroyer and a submarine tender. Okay? So that's 90 miles south of the United States. Thus, Soviet strategic missiles had returned to Cuba after all the commotion in the early 1960s and a possible nuclear war. So, Soviet ballistic missile submarine and fleet ballistic missile submarines had not previously called at any ports outside of the Soviet Union. Significantly, the missile submarine's arrival took place as President Richard Nixon flew into Moscow for a state visit, and the Vietnam conflict was at that time in the American headlines. Again, the escalation of Soviet activity in Cuba came as American attention was focused elsewhere. The U.S. government voiced no protest against the Gulf ballistic missile submarine visit, but the Department of Defense officials stated this looks like steady escalation. All that's left now is for them to bring in a nuclear submarine with ballistic missiles, and they'll be crowding the so-called understanding between us. A U.S. military analyst article about the build-up astutely observed, from that point on, the story of the Soviet Navy in the Caribbean became a tale of consistent gains made in small, systematic steps with U.S. acquiescence. Additional Echo 2 and Gulf submarine port visits followed, as did visits by diesel attack submarines and surface combatants. Now, this was in the Reagan times. In 1984, Soviet deployment to the Caribbean included the helicopter carrier missile cruiser Leningrad, at the time one of the largest warships in the Soviet Navy. The vessel too visited Cuba. Soviet warship visits to the end of the Cold War averaged more than one per year, with more ship visits to the Caribbean island than to any other country outside of the Soviet bloc. For most of this period, the task force visits averaged about 45 days. So what were they doing there in the Gorbachev times, right? When the Soviets were leaving Angola and other places like Afghanistan, but to Cuba they kept coming. However, I want to look closer at 1970, at the month of December. You see, the administration officials placed high up reportedly suspected that the Soviet Union was playing a maritime cat-and-mouse game with its submarine tender in the Caribbean. If I were the Russians, I would run that ship around for the next 6 months, a senior official commented to a newsman in late November. That is what the government analysts believed the Soviet Union is doing. The 9,000-ton tender of class known as Ochre has been the center of the controversy that has been simmering both publicly and privately between the Nixon administration and the Kremlin since late September. It started when a Soviet naval squadron, for the third time in 15 months, called at the Cuban ports of Havana and Cienfuegos between September 9 and 12. Soon after, the principal Soviet ships, including a guided missile cruiser and a guided missile destroyer, sailed home. Several auxiliary vessels, including the tender and 2 special barges, remained at Cienfuegos. You understand that those barges could have been concealed scientific ships too, but, well, what do we know? United States U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed the ships, as well as the new shore construction, and intelligence experts alerted the White House. Before going abroad on December 1st, Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird discussed Soviet naval deployment in the Caribbean. A submarine base, he said, requires the presence of a tender, and it's the tender that is the important thing. At the same time, he said that there were no indications that a Soviet submarine had been serviced in Cienfuegos or other Cuban waters by the tender. He said the tender was moving around in the Caribbean and was now somewhere south of Haiti. Asked whether he was surprised that it was still in the Caribbean waters, he replied in the negative, but he said that he would be surprised if it serviced the Soviet submarine in Cuban waters, in view of the Soviet declaration in October that the agreement that ended the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis was still being adhered to. Laird agreed that the accord did not preclude such servicing outside of Caribbean waters. Very interesting. I assume that the tender will be used to service submarines in the future, and I don't know what reason that hang on to it if they did not service submarines, he added. He said that the presence of the tender in the Caribbean might increase the Soviet nuclear submarine threat to the United States 33 to 40% by reducing the time spent going to and from home ports. He also detailed the whereabouts of other Soviet auxiliary vessels on the Caribbean and said that the Defense Department might give out periodic reports. But I'm not for port here each time the Soviet Navy blows its nose, he declared. I don't exactly understand what he means, but I get the feeling. In addition to military equipment, Cuba depended on the Soviet Union for military training, financial support, and especially petroleum. As the Soviet Union began to implode in 1990 and 1991, these various forms of assistance began to dry up, and ship and aircraft visits ceased. Specific Havana-Moscow agreements have kept the Lourdes station operating for the benefit of the Russian intelligence services. That's after the end of the USSR. But most other Soviet activities in Cuba rapidly became a memory. So there was a tender, and Americans mentioned a submarine base, but they didn't really care about that tender servicing submarines in the Caribbean outside of Cuba. Very interesting. So my conclusion has been that the Soviet submarines operated in the waters outside of Cuba. They have been serviced by the tender. The Americans knew about it, did not worry, I suspect tolerated or encouraged the Soviet presence there. Most likely, of course, in the Mexican waters as well. It's not too far away. Look, there are secrets that we can only guess about. And I have stated that I believe that there has been close cooperation at the highest levels of our governments when it comes to UFOs and apparently some other related phenomena. Of course, USOs as well. Unidentified submersible objects. So this is when the Soviet submarines observed strangeness by Yucatan and down below. And if we are to believe the recent report from Belize, underwater humanoids. But I need more proof before I agree with this report from Belize. I gotta find out more. And I also, outside of that, I would like to have more proof that they, whoever those beings are, may reside in the blue hole. So what is that place? Well, it's a beautiful, mesmerizing place to visit, as some divers told me. The blue hole is located along the Belize Barrier Reef, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, part of the second largest barrier reef system in the world, an almost perfectly circular area of dark topaz water, encircled by the lighthouse atoll on the Belize Barrier Reef. The Great Blue Hole is one of the most intriguing and popular places to dive anywhere on the planet Earth. Longest secret known only to Belizean fishermen. Okay? The Belize Blue Hole became famous in 1971 when legendary marine biologist and undersea explorer Jacques Cousteau visited the site. So, 1 year after the alleged visit from the Soviet submarine to the waters in the area, and Jacques Cousteau, based on my research and look at my video about the Easter Island too, I think Jacques Cousteau knew more than has been revealed. But that's my personal thing. Now, I also think that the Soviet submarines might have been in the area of the Blue Hole itself. But you see, that's not what it was called so back then. Cousteau and his crew aboard the Calypso explored the depths of the Blue Hole, confirming that it had been created thousands of years ago when rising tides flooded a network of caves. Declared by Cousteau as one of the top 10 best diving spots on the planet, the Belize Blue Hole is located approximately 60 miles or 100 kilometers from the coast of Belize. Divers can use the shallow waters of the atoll's lagoon to begin their descent to the now flooded cave that contains stalactites and stalagmites up to 40 feet or 12 meters in length. The coral atoll surrounding the Belize Blue Hole has an inner ring of shallow, lighter colored water that forms a natural ring around the deeper sapphire waters of the flooded cave. Thousands of years ago, when the cave flooded, the Belize Blue Hole was formed, a vertical entrance over 980 feet or 300 meters across, with a bottom more than 400 feet, 125 meters, below the sea surface today. As divers descend into the Blue Hole, the dark waters start to become more clear, allowing for an impressive view of the flooded cave network that is home to a variety of marine life, including a very few interesting elusive hammerhead sharks. Due to the complexity and depth of the dive, again, only the experienced divers are permitted to explore that majestic underwater formation. That makes that Belize Blue Hole basically a unique dive site. Let me tell you a few more facts about it, and maybe if you are in Belize, you can look at that wonder of nature as well. The Blue Hole measures up to 1,000 feet in circumference and is more than 400 feet deep. It is the largest natural formation of this type found anywhere in the world. The Blue Hole was formed at the end of the last ice age, when rising seawaters flooded a series of enormous caves. Geologists have determined that the caves first formed about 153,000 years ago and were completely submerged approximately 15,000 years ago. This period, from 15,000 to 11,000 years ago, roughly, is very interesting when it comes to ancient mysteries, at least to me. The underwater caves of the Blue Hole are filled with giant stalactites, proof that it once existed above water. The Blue Hole is home to several species of sharks, including bull sharks, Caribbean reef sharks, and of course the elusive hammerhead shark. Outside of what I'm telling you today, I'd like to talk to you in the future about this very strange creature, the hammerhead shark. Not today. In 2012, the Discovery Channel ranked the Blue Hole as #1 on its list of 10 most amazing places on Earth. The Blue Hole is visible from space, easily identifiable by its unique circular formation and location within the midst of the greater Belize Barrier Reef. The name Blue Hole was coined by the British diver Ned Middleton in his book 10 Years Underwater, published in 1988. The Great Blue Hole has been described by NASA as surrounded by darker, deeper ocean waters, with coral atolls that often glow in vibrant hues of turquoise, teal, peacock blue, or aquamarine. Belize Lighthouse Reef Atoll fits this description with its shallow waters covering light-colored coral. The combination of water and pale corals creates varying shades of blue-green. Within this small sea of light colors, however, lies a giant circle of deep blue. Okay, now let's look at some underwater wonders of Mexico and possible locations of creatures that could be characterized as humanoids. Look, I also heard stories many years ago, but you see, locals are very reluctant to talk, and few of them want to attract attention to ancient artifacts and strange phenomena that better be left alone. Too many predators out there. Mexico is a wonderful country. There are many archaeological findings in it that have become, important tourist attractions, alas, because tourists do some unsavory things. Not all. Such is the case of Tulum, which is an archaeological zone located in front of the Caribbean Sea, specifically in the extreme south of the Mayan Riviera, in the Mexican state of Quintana Roo, which stands erect ahead of time and hurricanes. Look, it changed since I saw it 30-some years ago. I remember writing a Russian language article about its strange statues that resemble astronauts in the area. It was republished in Russia and in the Far East. That much I remember. Maybe children of those who have read my articles are now settling in Yucatan, because there's plenty of Russian-speaking people in Cancun and beyond. But that's another story, not the one I'm very much interested in. It is important to note that the Mayan Riviera represents the main destination for underground cave diving that has been developed in the recent decades and that has made significant progress in recent years. It shelters great mysteries of the prehistoric world, having been explored 1,500 kilometers of submerged caves of the 8,000 kilometers that are estimated to be in the entire Yucatan Peninsula. Researchers have discovered a relatively well-preserved skeleton of what is believed to be a female inside the sunken caves of Tulum. The remains are believed to be 9,900 years old and show anatomical features that greatly differ from other ancient humans in the region. The discovery was made in a submerged cave system on the northeastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. This cave system is considered to be one of the most extensive active underwater cave systems on the planet, with a presumed length spanning more than 7,000 kilometers in length. So far, only 1,500 kilometers have been explored by experts. I think by now it's more. See, in 2018, we learned that for the first time in thousands of years, sacred Maya underwater tunnels in Mexico's Yucatan are being rediscovered. According to the researchers from the Mexico's National Anthropology and History Institute, in the tunnel-like caves, the Institute researchers have discovered human bones and the bones of elephant-like creatures, giant sloths, bears, tigers, and extinct species of horses, now extinct plants, and Maya pottery. And like I read many years ago, and still it sends the chills down my spine, human bones and bones of creatures that are not human. But of that I don't have proof. I don't think anything like that will come to the surface soon. The caves measure from 400 feet to just 3 feet. This immense cave, they represents the most important submerged archaeological site in the world, according to Guillermo de Anda, director of the Institute study. However, it is not yet determined how the Maya artifacts came to rest in the caves. The team had been exploring an extensive network of limestone caves housing numerous Maya artifacts, and their discovery will shed light on many mysteries of ancient Maya. I hope. A route through the underwater limestone caves connecting the Sac Actun cenote and the Dos Ojos cenote represents a remarkable underwater system measuring more than 340 kilometers in length. Well, a surprising discovery has been made in Mexico's Quintana Roo state. Divers have discovered a well-preserved skeleton from a submerged cave near the Maya ruins of Tulum. Okay? Analysis of the human remains suggests they greatly differ from other humans who inhabited the region in the distant past. This is the second time I'm telling you that. Humans have been living in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico since at least the late Pleistocene, 126,000 to 11,700 years ago. Significant. So almost 12,000 years ago. Much of what we know about these first settlers in Mexico comes from the 9 well-preserved human skeletons found in caves and sinkhole cenotes near Tulum. Well, explorations of the cave system in the recent past have revealed the skeletal remains of an individual named Chanhal II, which is one of the oldest human skeletons found on the American continent. The Chanhal II skeleton is believed to be 13,000 years old. Curiously, the Chanhal III skull features a slightly longer and narrower brain case, the part of the head that contains the brain, and a slightly narrower face compared to other ancient populations in Mexico. In other words, the skeletons of the Chanhal cave show traces of an entirely different population, one that has not been found anywhere else so far. The researchers therefore proposed that there were at least 2 very different groups of people inhabiting present-day Mexico at the very end of the last ice age. Furthermore, the scientists suggest that both groups of people may have been very different, not only anatomically but culturally as well. The people that inhabited central Mexico some 12,000 years ago were probably good hunters and also produced elaborate stone tools. And the people who lived in the Yucatan Peninsula were small and delicate, probably living off fruit, sweet cactus or honey, and without any signs of tools. So you see the difference. But here's another interesting report. Divers have rediscovered an ochre mine in a submerged coastal cave system in Tulum that is more than 1,000 years old. 2 cave divers from the Quintana Roo Aquifer System Research Center located the mine in 2017 and showed it to Edward Reinhardt, a geoarchaeologist at McMaster University in Canada, the following year, in 2018 again. The 3 men concluded that ochre, an earthly yellow, red or brown colored substance used for a variety of purposes, including rock art, body painting, and tanning of animal hides, and possibly as medicine, it was mined in the now submerged cave system thousands of years ago. Okay? I want to stop here for now and mention a very unusual person named Edgar Cayce of North America. He lived between 1877 and 1945 and was an American clairvoyant, soothsayer who claimed to channel from his higher self while asleep in trance-like state. His words were recorded by his friend and his wife and later by his secretary. During sessions, Cayce would answer questions on a variety of subjects like healing, reincarnation, dreams, and afterlife, past lives, nutrition, Atlantis, and future events. Look, I'm not much for prophecies, but I do not discount the existence of precognition, and you can find some of my videos on this subject from Russia and from Eurasia. According to Cayce, Atlantis, located from the Gulf of Mexico to Gibraltar, was destroyed in a final catastrophic event around 10,000 BC. And according to Cayce, the Atlanteans began to help along the ancient civilization of Mexico at the time which would have been over 12,000 years ago. This is a story of the so-called lost Atlantean library. I think this is a very important, I don't want to say fact, but at least hypothesis, and those interested should do their own research. I am leaving markers for you. Remember that period, 12,000 years ago. Mexico is not that far away from the United States, for those who listen to me in Canada, in the United States, or in Brazil, and Yucatan is a wonderful place to do research. But be careful not to go where you are not wanted. As for the ancient world 12,000 years ago, I will definitely make more videos about it, because I do have more to share. You can start, by the way, with the Shigir idol video in my channel. So, more about the caves. There are underwater limestone caves in Quintana Roo, of course. They connect these two previously known cenotes near Tulum. Cenote is a water-filled limestone sinkhole of the Yucatan. According to Maya beliefs, cenotes were considered the third level of the universe, after the heavens and the earth. This belief was an important part of Maya religion, widespread in what is now Mexico's Yucatan, along with Central American countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Cenotes are very powerful, magical space where the supernatural reign, where gods and goddesses lived, where the good and the bad coexisted, where men came from. It's a tunnel of time that transports you to a place 10 to 12,000 years ago, according to at least one Mexican researcher. Efforts to locate the tunnel that I mentioned to you began about the year 2004, headed by the lead diver Robert Schmittner, who spent 20 years trying to find a direct connection between the Sac Actun cenote in the south of the state and Dos Ojos cenote towards the north. Schmittner and Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia researchers began their focused investigation in 2017, and then sometimes later discovered the underwater route that I mentioned between the two cenotes. Listen to what I'm telling you. And when you go to Quintana Roo, you'll have some markers. It was like trying to follow the veins within a body. According to the diver, it was a labyrinth of paths that sometimes came together and sometimes separated. We had to be very careful. At certain points, the tunnel shrinks from 120 meters in width to just 1 meter. In my opinion, future researchers research will show that there are underwater tunnels under Belize and Mexico, in the Quintana Roo area and beyond, and that underwater humanoids move about there, and that there is so much more to find in the waters of the sea next to Mexico. I read a few interesting accounts reported about strange encounters, if you can describe them like that, including one that took place in a cenote, and it was not a humanoid but a very unusual creature. Look, I'm convinced that the United States government and the Soviets had known about this and more, much more, and probably worked in tandem. But that's all I know. Please note that I did not talk about any alleged underwater ruins around Cuba. It is quite possible that the Soviets look at them as well, but we need more confirmation that what has been circulated on the internet. And I've studied it and I don't find it completely convincing. In my other videos, I have described Soviet military exploration of the Bermuda Triangle. I believe they had much interest in the marine mysteries on either side of Cuba. And the Americans were involved as well. It has to be. Look at my video about Mariana Trench. But really, there is not much out there about humanoids or aquatic humanoids in the Caribbean. And I'm not referring to mermaids per se, but to other types. Now, in the next video, I will tell you about the strange creatures, call them humanoid, that exist in the jungles of both countries, Belize, Mexico, in the areas that I have described. And also I want to tell you a few more interesting things about Yucatan, because this is a wonderful place, esoteric in many ways. So I hope you like my research and you can support me. You'll find description and the details, and you'll find details in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Please tell others, and I'll try to bring you as many videos and as soon as possible. Thank you.